We've been doing this for 5 months now. It's been a marathon, and I've finished my first series, and that's in the book of Romans. Um, and we did that with Ivan for 8 months. But this one, I believe so, it will just be 6 months, if God willing, because we're almost at the end of this book called Revelation. To begin with, I have three non-negotiable themes in the study of Revelation, and I believe you have your pen and paper with you. Anyway, I keep on reiterating this every session. That's every Friday night. So first is our study is purely, rigidly, strictly Christocentric, or other people call it Christ-centered. What do I mean by that? We begin with Jesus Christ and end with Him, and everything in between is about Him. I know that the book of Revelation is full of imagery. Some are not good, some are frightening. And we are tempted to connect that to our events right now, current events. But I believe that the center of Revelation is no other than Jesus Christ. Why? Because He is the revelator. John, may that be one of the disciples, or John the apostle called the beloved, is simply the receiver. Because in the original, apocalypsis means to disclose. All right, to reveal what's hidden. And what's hidden, if we connect that to the book of prophecy in the Old Testament, especially in Daniel, it says there, seal up. So after that's been sealed up, so that was closed. Now it is disclosed by Christ Himself. So our hope lies in Jesus Christ as the subject of revelation, as the revelator Himself, and Him being the center of it all. Second non-negotiable is that the New Testament, especially Revelation, is highly informed, highly shaped by the Old Testament. Our Old Testament is actually the Hebrew manuscript. And when we look at the verses, themes, imageries in Revelation, it is shaped by the prophetic books in the Old Testament. What are those? Major, we have Isaiah primarily, and then followed by Ezekiel, then Daniel, and Jeremiah, and then the minor prophets. That's why they are called the prophetic books, and Revelation is a prophetic book. However, I also qualified that when we read the word prophecy in the Bible, yes, it talks about the future, but not alone. Because when you share God's word, like sharing the good news about Jesus Christ, you are also prophesying. So in other words, if you're a prophet, generally speaking, you foretell the future, but also you are a prophet when you share God's message of hope or about Jesus Christ. Third, which is equally important, is that I take the whole book of Revelation as metaphorical figures of speech. It's all symbolic. Why? My first argument is that John sees these things with his mind's eye. He was in a vision. Therefore, he's not seeing these things with his physical eyes. And if we will be consistent with our Bible exposition or with our hermeneutics, when we talk about in the book of Acts, when Peter sees that, that blanket, or you have that white linen full of non-kosher food or animals that's unclean to the Jews. We say Peter in the first place couldn't eat that because it's just a vision, it's symbolic. Why don't we apply the same thing here when it's all a vision? Because it's gonna be problematic if we're gonna pick and choose. Well, this verse in Revelation talks about, for instance, the seven churches. Yeah, that's literal. But when we talk about, for instance, the frogs, three frogs, that's symbolic. How do we know? If we're gonna cherry pick, for instance, if we're gonna take chapter 19 of Revelation as symbolic, and then when we go to chapter 20, it's gonna be literal. How do we know? As a systematic theologian, I just take this wholesale. That means from Revelation 1 to Revelation 22, it's all symbolic, and I've laid down what I did so. Simply, I was just using concordance. That all these imageries, these words, these descriptions came from the prophetic books in the Old Testament. So I just want to lay the foundation so you won't be confused with tonight's presentation. That's why I'm recording this. Don't worry, I'm going to be uploading it. You know me, every time I present, there will always be something new. That's why there are people, I'm not saying majority, I would say a few people who get confused. Why? Because it's the first time they hear it, and it's not what they've been hearing for so long. It's something fresh. What I'm presenting here is an alternative presentation. I'm not saying what you've been hearing with Revelation prophecies, may that be in the Adventist Church or elsewhere, are wrong. What I'm saying here, and let me get this clear, is I'm merely presenting an alternative interpretation, meaning of the book of Revelation. And as a systematic theologian, I see themes, I see coherence, I see the continuity from Genesis to Revelation. It's so consistent. It's not uniform, of course, but the books here, although it span from, I would say, roughly for 3,000 years of writing, it's coherent. Why? Because there's only one source, and the source is God. Same thing here in Revelation. There's only one revelator. We don't have revelators here. Only one source, and that's Jesus Christ. So I'll be sharing now the screen after that long introduction. Simply because you'll be hearing new things, but I assure you it's all biblical, it's all backed up by texts, majority, of course, from the Old Testament. So there you go. Just a minute. Okay. So if you won't let me know if there's something wrong, that means you can see the passage here clearly. I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version. We're now on Revelation 19. Last time we ended off in verse 10. So we have here the title, The Rider on the White Horse. Let me drink first. Then I saw heaven open, and there was a white horse. Its rider is called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war. His eyes are like a flame of fire, and on his head are many diadems, and he has a name inscribed that no one knows but himself. He is clothed in a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies of heaven, wearing fine linen, white and pure, were following him on white horses. From his mouth comes a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. He will tread the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God the Almighty. On his robe and on his thigh he has a name inscribed King of Kings and Lord of Lords. That is why I mentioned in Revelation 6, when we talked about the four horsemen, the first horseman there riding on the white horse is no other than Jesus Christ. Perhaps it's going to be the first time you heard it. Yes, you heard me right. And this is my evidence. The one riding on a horse is called Faithful and True, as opposed to the enemy, the dragon, the ancient serpent, who tell lies, who was, who is, and who is not. He is not eternal. Why is Jesus Christ eternal? Who was, who is to come? Because he is faithful and true. And in righteousness, he judges and makes war. That's why I also emphasize that amongst the four horsemen, it's only the rider on the white horse who is called the conqueror. Well, that's your homework. You can read that in Revelation 6. Other horsemen were not called a conqueror, only the one riding on the white horse. Jesus conquers. How? He doesn't have a sword. Consider the first horseman on the white horse. He has a bow, and bow, if you're gonna connect that with Revelation, Genesis 6 onward, and especially in the narrative about Noah, that means peace. That's why he is called the Prince of Peace in Isaiah. Yes, he makes war, but what is his type of war? In winning souls, in converting people. His eyes are like a flame of fire. So we have here, like I said, the writer of Revelation is highly shaped, highly informed by our Old Testament or the Hebrew manuscript. Then I should be true to it. You can read that in Daniel 10:6. I've been doing that throughout our series here, always quoting from the Hebrew manuscript. And here you can read that Daniel 10:6, same imagery. What does it mean? Flame of fire, and on his head are many diadems. You see, God is pictured like a fire over and over again in Revelation, and so in the Old Testament as well. And I'm gonna be mentioning later that it's a known fact that God is also called the consuming fire. And we have here another evidence, him being described as like a flame of fire. That is his description. And on his head are many diamonds. That means he's a king, he's a conqueror, and he has a name inscribed that no one knows but himself. And this name is given to those who are triumphant. We discussed that in the 7 churches, bearing the name of God, which no one knows. Only God knows. But to me, that name is no other than Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ in Christology, one of my specialization, Jesus means that he is the Son of Man, and Christ being The Messiah, there's only one Messiah. There's only one Son of God. And there are many Jesuses during his time. What does it mean to mention Jesus Christ, to proclaim his name? That he is the absolute representative of humanity, and as Christ is the absolute representative of the divinity, the triune God. He is clothed in a robe dipped in blood, martyrdom. We know that for a fact. That's why he's also described as the lamb that was slain before the foundation of the world. That's in Revelation 13 and in 17. And the armies, yes, because he's making war, converting people. Armies of heaven wearing fine linen. They're not wearing here armor for war. Why fine linen? Because he's called in 11, faithful and true, and in righteousness. This is his righteousness, fine linen, the white robe, same thing in the book of Zechariah. The white robe, white turban. And we have here the wedding garment, which we already discussed a few sessions ago. White and pure. That's the righteousness of God, of Jesus Christ. We don't have righteousness. I keep on pounding this. It's like Joshua the high priest and Zechariah. He was accused by the enemy, and we have the same imagery we discussed last time, that the enemies are accuser day and night. Because without the robe of righteousness, we are really what? Condemned. Yes, his accusations are true. Although he's full of lies, but it's true. But when we have Jesus Christ in us, and that's why it's all symbolic, symbolized by his white garment, fine linen, white pure. And his horse is also white. From his mouth comes a sharp sword. Okay, not in his hand, because in his hand was a bow. Means his covenant of peace. But the sharp sword, remember Hebrews 4, double-edged sword, that's the word of God, which to strike down nations. That's why I said, yes, he is conquering, he is waging war. How? By his word. How does he strike nations, strike kings? By converting them. I already told beforehand that Jesus Christ is unlike the kings there in Daniel 2 from Babylon. Then you have the Medes and the Persians, and then the Greeks, and then the Romans. Those emperors get rid of their enemies by what? By killing them, wiping them out, execution them. How does God get rid of his enemies? By making them his friends, by converting them. Otherwise, he's no better than these tyrants, by these cruel emperors. Yes, he is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords here in verse 16, but he is like no other secular king or secular lord. He even says, let's love our enemies, and he will do otherwise. He will annihilate out of hate, out of anger, out of vengeance, when he is the same God who tells us to love our enemies. What would you expect? Of course, he will live by example. That's why on the cross, in front of his executioners, those who accused him, those who reviled him, those who mocked him, he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Do you think the Father will listen to his Son? Of course, because they're one, triune God. And that's binding. And on his robe and on his thigh, he has a name inscribed, King of Kings, Lord of Lords. What does this mean? I keep on highlighting the sovereignty of God here in Revelation. That's why you write this down. If you miss this point, Revelation chapters 4, 5, 7, 15, 19. What are these? These are interludes here in Revelation. When you read these chapters, worship in heaven is ongoing. It never ends. Why is that so when it's chaotic here on earth? You see, you have here the seven churches, persecution of the saints. You have here the seals, where you have the red horse, black horse, pale horse, pandemic, war, confusion. You have the seven trumpets where you have judgment, let alone the seven bowls, the seven last plagues. Is God serious? As if he's unaffected in heaven. What is the message? Exactly what Brother Heifer at the outset, that despite what's happening here on earth, wars, rumors of wars, pandemic, inflation, you name it, it's not gonna end. But why is the worship in heaven doesn't end as well? That means God is in control. God is in charge. Everything is according to plan. That's why he's revealing it. He's disclosing it, that he is indeed the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Then I saw an angel standing in the sun, and with a loud voice he called to all the birds that fly in mid-heaven, "Come, gather for the great supper of God, to eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captives." I told you, if you're gonna cherry pick, well, you're gonna say, "Oh, it's obvious that this is symbolic." Yes, what about the other parts? Then you're gonna say, "Well, that's literal." No, that's not the way forward. I don't have my own agenda. What I'm doing here is just quoting from the prophetic books in the Old Testament using concordance. Concordance is universal. It doesn't put forward a specific church or specific belief. It's highly objective. It even uses AI. How does concordance work? By using first original language, that's Hebrew and Greek. Second, the context. Third, the crisscrossing of these events or this parallelism. You call that chiastic method in Hebrew. And where can we see here that the robe dipped in blood? The one that we read, that's in Isaiah 63:3. The martyrdom of Jesus Christ himself. How can that be when he is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords? That's how he reigns. He reigns by self-sacrifice, and he calls us to do so. It's not an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. When we discuss the origin of war, there in Israel/Palestine or Palestine/Israel. God is in the business of mending differences, of uniting people, not otherwise. This is the same thing here. Yes, there will be catastrophes, there will imageries that it's full of violence, and we should read on like this one, to eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captains, the flesh of the mighty. What does this mean? Well, the Old Testament will explain that to us. The flesh of the horses and their riders, flesh of all, both free and slave, both small and great. Does it mean cannibalism? No, because the punishing or the smiting or God's judgment can be read in Isaiah 11:4. And it doesn't talk about destruction per se. It talks about the future hope of Israel. What is his sovereignty for? He is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and he can't fulfill his will. He can't accomplish his purpose. It doesn't make sense. That's why he's sovereign over all, because when, like I said, he's the Alpha and Omega. The first meaning of that, which is general, is that he's the first, and so he's the last. Yes, but the deeper sense of it is the Alpha or the Aleph in Hebrew, and he's the Omega or the Tau in Hebrew, because Alpha and Omega are Greek letters and Aleph and Tau are Hebrew letters. It's the same meaning. That means he has no end simply because he has no beginning. There is no one like that. It's only God. Isn't that amazing? And if you connect that with being the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, so when he created in Genesis, he has in mind revelation. It's not by chance, believe me. It's all according to God's master plan, to his blueprint. Whatever God does, he has the horizon in mind. And that's very clear in Isaiah. And why am I sure? Because I've written my second book here, Constructing Eschatology, Rethinking the Prophecy of Isaiah. And I believe, and I mentioned here, that's actually my premise, that Revelation is highly informed by Isaiah. That's why I use a lot of Isaianic prophecies here in interpreting Revelation. And one of which is in Isaiah 63:3 and Isaiah 11:4. And the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, because I know you're writing this down, is Daniel 2:47. That overall the evil or the wicked will perish. What am I doing here? I'm just using the Old Testament to interpret Revelation. I'm not basing this on current events or on YouTube or elsewhere, what other preachers say. No, I'm just being sola scriptura. Isn't that what Adventism is all about? The Bible and the Bible alone. The Bible interprets itself. So why do I need extra canonical sources or references? I'm not saying Revelation has nothing to do with current events. Of course it does. But it primarily speaks about its context. And what's that? It's this book is written almost at the end of first century. That's according to scholars 94 to 97 CE. That's Christian era. And this is about encouraging members there in Asia Minor, or is that southwest Turkey, where you have the 7 churches from Ephesus to Laodicea. It's primarily for them. What about us? We are in the secondary application. That's why I said on the onset, yes, we have all this turmoil, calamity, confusion, never-ending. What was there's a term for that. Pandemonium. All right. But why are we studying Revelation? Because we have hope in this book. Our hope comes from Jesus Christ alone, not with the events. Yes, events are important, but what's most important is the one coming. And that's in the final chapter of Revelation. Then I saw the beasts and the kings of the earth with the armies gathered to make war. Remember, Jesus Christ waging war, and so is the beast. You know what the enemy is doing with his cohorts, the beast. We know that already. We discussed that rulers of this earth, the emperors, kings, or anything that leads secular government. They copy, they imitate what is God's. That's why we have these imageries. Like the woman, there's the woman in scarlet, remember? In purple, but those colors are in the temple. So imitation, in order to confuse people. That's why it's full of adulteries in it. It's a mixture. As opposed to white linen, pure, faithful and true. So it's no coincidence, it's no surprise when God is in the business of conquering, the enemy does that as well. But we already know that the enemy can't do anything without the permission of God, and we have that in chapter 20. He's actually chained. So who's sovereign? It's God, of course, not the enemy, not the beast, not his courts. Gathered to make war against the rider on the horse, on Jesus Christ, and against the army, the saints. Or you can include that the angels, but primarily the saints. How do they fight? By sacrificing, by being martyrs. And the beast was captured, and with the false prophet. You see here, God has his own prophet. The enemy has his prophets as well, but they're false. Again, imitation. It's all false. It's all fake. What performed in its presence the signs by which he deceived those who have received the mark of the beast. We already discussed that, and those who worship its image. If you want to know that, then go to FIC YouTube channel or on my channel to watch the previous sessions. These two were thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur. I'm gonna emphasize this. I explained further, and the rest were killed by the sword of the rider on the horse. Remember, that sword comes from his mouth, not from his hand. The sword that came from his mouth. And all the birds were gorged with their flesh. Write this down, flesh. The eating of the flesh, it's not cannibalism. You can read that in Jeremiah 12:9 and Ezekiel 13:4. Now, perhaps you're going to ask this question, which I already explained over and over again. Why does John, the writer of Revelation, used imageries? Because they were under the Roman Empire. They were under surveillance, under persecution. Some died, some were imprisoned, some were penalized. That's why all should be coded. Otherwise, they'll be in a lot of trouble, further trouble. Second, so how will the recipients of this epistle called Revelation know what he's talking about? They know because they're Jewish Christians. They're fully aware of these imageries in their manuscript. That is the Old Testament. What about the Gentile Christians? That's why the Jewish Christians and the Gentile Christians are in one church, like in the church in Rome, like in the church in Ephesus, and so on, in Pergamum, Sardis, for them to interpret that to their co-members. What about us? Yes, we're lost. We don't know the context. We don't know the imageries. And we're lost in translation as well, literally speaking. That's why we need to revisit the Old Testament. These are all in the Old Testament, the imageries, believe me. We don't have to go elsewhere. It's all in the Old Testament. Like this instance, eating the flesh, what does it mean? That the evil shall perish, they will come to an end. They're not the victors. The victors here, the triumphant, are the saints. Yes, they were martyred, but they are conquering with God. They are on the right side, on the side of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. What about this one, the lake of fire? You can read that as well in Isaiah 30:33. Write that down, please. And Daniel 7:11. Now, since I already built the foundation that I take Revelation chapter 1 to 22, all verses, metaphorically, these are all figures of speech, including the 144,000, and a year later, the 1,000 years, the millennium. So I'm not in the business of computing. I'm in the business of analyzing, critically analyzing, what does this imagery, this symbol mean? Again, I'm not saying others are wrong. They're called for that. And this is how I interpret Revelation. According to my study, I'm not simply a user, I'm a writer. This book is already my second book. My first book is this one. It's about the suffering of God. And you can Google my name, and you can see my books in Amazon, in Apple. And I'm writing my third book. It's about the minor prophets alongside Plato, which again enlightened me how to interpret Revelation. I'm gonna explain that later. First off, isn't far enough to consume, if we're gonna use the metaphor here? Fire consumes, or let's say it consumes the wicked, it consumes sin and anything that's abominable to God. Have you wondered why here in Revelation, especially in 19:20 specifically, fire is tandem with sulfur? You tell me. Because I did my research already when writing the second book. Do you know the answer? Why is it that fire, when in and of itself, consumes already? It burns and it annihilates, it erases any trace of that material, or in this sense, being, if you like to take it physically, literally, not symbolically. Fire alone is enough. Why is it that over and over again, here in Revelation 19 and 20, we see fire always in tandem, always partnered with sulfur? This is what I discovered. Sulfur is not meant for consuming. Sulfur is used, we have here science persons, your nurses, or you're in the medical field. You know what sulfur is about, what its purpose, what is it for, what it is intended for. It's not consuming, isn't it? Because sulfur is used to what? Come on, critical analysis. Even if you Google this and go to encyclopedia, to science books, it's for purification. It's for cleansing. It's for healing. Its nutrients are meant not to annihilate, but to heal. So what's going on here? There's fire, and fire is always with sulfur. Remember, God is unlike other emperors. He's very unlike Nebuchadnezzar, very unlike Emperor Nero, even unlike Cyrus the Great, and so on. He's in the business of healing, of restoring, of making amends. That's why his covenant is a covenant of peace, not a covenant of vengeance, of anger. That's why I said we won't be lost in interpreting Revelation if we are fully, rigidly, strictly Christocentric. You won't be sidetracked. You won't get lost, believe me. Focus on Jesus. Yes, he is the King of Kings and he is the Lord of Lords. And he is also the far and sulfur. Because it's symbolic, isn't it? Figures of speech. Now, what's my evidence here? Write this down, please. In Revelation 1:15, we had there the fire is described as a purifier or for refinement. And also in Revelation 3:18. And we read a while ago here that his eyes are like a flame of fire, again symbolic. Okay, further, and there are many. I'll just give you a bit just to maintain your curiosity. Isaiah 4:4. Still in Isaiah, that's chapter 6, 6-7. 10:17. That God, and here Jesus Christ, is the consuming fire. That's why it's always partnered with sulfur. He's not burning with anger. Yes, he smites, he punishes, but that's all a discipline, because in Isaiah and in other prophetic books like in Ezekiel, Jeremiah, even in Daniel, minor prophets, God's smiting or striking is for healing, for restoration. Otherwise, he's no better off than other tyrants, other emperors. That's why he's comparing and contrasting that he is indeed different, unlike no other king, unlike no other lord. And this is obvious. Isn't it the Holy Spirit is also described as a fire? Matthew 3:11-12. Luke 3:16-17. Acts 2:3-4. Remember during the time of the Pentecost, and 1 Thessalonians 5:19. Of course, I mentioned a lot of Isaiahs here, 4:4, 6:6-7, 10:7, and there are many other, believe me. The Bible is describing God as a consuming fire. And that's meant to purify, to heal, to restore. That's why we have here in the last part of 20, fire that burns with sulfur, and we have the same imagery in chapter 20. And the rest were killed by the sword. Again, it's when you take all of this as figure of speech and focus on Jesus Christ, that's why it says here clearly, yes, he's got the sword, but the sword is from his mouth. That's the word of God, the Logos. You know that the Logos is a Greek concept? Well, we shouldn't be surprised. The New Testament is written in Greek. Even Paul quotes from Greek philosophers. According to my research, around 5 times in Pauline epistles. Why am I saying this one? Because when we get to chapter 20, that's going to be next time, the millennium there is actually informed by the Greeks. Hold on to your chairs. You might fall. But this is what I discovered based on my research. Our concept of hell comes from the Greek concept of hell. And that's Hades, Tartarus, Gehenna. Even in the original Greek, if you read the New Testament, those are the words for hell. Of course, you can read hell in English, but in Greek, you can read there Hades, you can read there Gehenna, you can read there Tartarus, and I'm gonna explain that next week. So invite more friends, more members. Our discussion will gonna go deeper and it's gonna be more exciting. You know what? Jesus's concept of hell is Hebrew, not Greek. And so are the apostles and disciples. Well, if you're gonna ask me, so Pastor, what's the Hebrew concept or Hebrew thought about the afterlife? Listen carefully. When they talk about the afterlife in the Old Testament, like in Psalms, in Proverbs, in Ecclesiastes, what's gonna happen in the afterlife? They don't call it hell. They call it nothingness. Even in the original, in Hebrew, in Aramaic, nothingness. What do you mean by that? They don't know what's in there. All they know is that there's no life and there's no consciousness. You know that in Ecclesiastes, in Psalms, it's not about fire and pitchfork and Hades. That's Greek. And after reading this, because my third book is, like I said, Minor Prophets, reading alongside Plato's Republic, highly philosophical, I was astounded that indeed the New Testament is highly also influenced by Greek thought. Unfortunately, the hell we have in mind, the concept of hell, the afterlife, is Greek, not Hebrew. So we're gonna straighten that up and out with our next discussion. So that's all I can say for now. And it's our time for Q&A.